Anxiety help. I'm creating a video today. It's really for anxiety sufferers or people that are more prone to anxiety or being anxious. Being someone who suffered from anxiety for many years, I know the terrible feeling, mental distress that people can be in, especially during times of a global pandemic or COVID-19. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about negative information and the effects that it can have on our physiology, on our overall well-being, and really our mental health. Now, I don't want anyone to think I'm underplaying what's happening out there in our world today with COVID-19. I just know that as anxious people or anxiety sufferers and people have disorders, they really overestimate the danger. And I mean by a lot, to the point where it can be very, very debilitating from a mental aspect. And that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about what maybe someone that's suffering from anxiousness or anxiety can do to just put things to a little bit more perspective so that they're not suffering so much from mental distress. Anyways, hope this video helps. Watching the news and the media have a negative effect on your physiology, your stress levels, can cause anxiety. And I'll also talk about why are we addicted to the news? Why is it that we need to watch negative information or news or media even when it doesn't make us feel good? Doesn't make sense, right? And then I'll also talk about some tips on how to take the news and look at it more objectively. And then I'll leave you with some tips on maybe how to reduce your intake, because that is really important. So let's start with, why are we as human beings addicted to not just news, but negative information, things that don't make us feel good? Well, it's because we have a negativity bias. That's what it's called. Our brains were handed down to us from our ancestors who lived in caves. And unfortunately, the way they're wired is to pay attention to negative information, because back in the day of cavemen, there was a benefit to paying attention to nearby dangers or threats. But obviously, in our modern world today, we don't need to be on that high alert. We don't have tigers or lions walking down the street trying to attack us. So that's why our brains, unfortunately, are wired to unconsciously look for and watch negative news. And so this wiring obviously causes us to crave this negativity and this negative information. And unfortunately, the media world, they know about this negativity bias, and thus they, depending on the media outlet, really, some of them can really sensationalize stories. And by that I mean, if you don't know what sensationalize means, they just blow it way out of proportion, right? They'll keep facts back, they will misconstrue things just to make the news more worrisome, because they know the more worried we are, the more we're going to pay attention to what they're saying. And so the other thing that happens is, not only are we more addicted to news or negative information, but we're also more sensitive to it. And so what I mean by that is that if you hear something negative in the news, it's gonna have more of an imprint on your brain. It'll cause a direct impact right away. But if you hear something good in the news, it's kind of in one ear out the other, because it's not really there to protect you, right? But that negative information that you hear, it's imprinted on your brain, and you think that you need to know about it, learn more about it, because you need to protect yourself. And so that's one thing that's another thing that happens with the negativity that are biased, that our brains are wired for. The other thing we tend to do with news that compounds all of this is we overestimate the danger. So what do I mean by that? Okay, what I mean by that is there's two ways to look at things, subjectively and objectively. And unfortunately, majority of human beings look at negative information and the media, such as the media or news, especially during this global pandemic crisis, COVID-19, they look at it from a subjective view. Subjective is personal opinion, it's your own assumption, and it really is centered around your belief and what you believe is happening, because you'll read something, but then you take it in as you would. Okay, objectively looking at something is actually taking the information, observing it, measuring it, looking at more facts, and just looking at it from a more objective and observational perspective. Now, to give you an example, let's say with COVID-19 right now, you read an article in the news and it says a 1-year-old is in the hospital due to COVID virus. Now, if you have a 1-year-old at home, that's really going to impact you, right? Because again, we're going to take that in subjectively. We're going to create an opinion about it. We're going to put our belief around it. And of course, we're going to want to protect ourselves, and we're going to say, okay, now I'm going to do everything I can with the baby. I might never leave the house while this is going on. Or you be just very, very overly cautious. And I'm not saying, and please don't take this in the way that I'm saying that you shouldn't be cautious about, COVID-19. Of course, you want to take all the cautionary measures and do what we're being told to do. I'm just trying to help those people that have a high level of anxiety or stress during these times, and sort of trying to give you some skills to bring that down. Okay, so don't stop doing what you're doing. Okay, now let's get back to the 1-year-old baby. So we take the news in from a subjective perspective. We create opinion about it, and unfortunately we don't look at it objectively, and it raises our stress levels, our anxiety levels, and it makes us a lot more prone to anxiety disorders because we are looking at it subjectively. Now, if we looked at it objectively, we could say, well, there's, I don't know, let's estimate, I'm just going to throw a number, but there's 30,000 1-year-olds in my province or country or whatever it is, and there's one that's on the news, that's in the media, that was in the hospital. So if I had a calculator and I want to know what the chances are that's going to happen to me, I could do a simple calculation. Again, that's just a simple way to sort of put it into a little bit more of a perspective for you, so that you're not just shell-shocked from that, because that's what will happen to human beings, right? They'll read it and say, boom, it affects them, it impacts them right away, because they're not looking at it objectively. So to make things worse, there's another bias. It's called the confirmation bias. And the confirmation bias, what it's going to do is it's going to compound your stress and anxiety levels, because what we do as human beings is we make an assumption about something. So a 1-year-old baby, I have to protect my baby's going to get sick, and then I start to research articles. So I Google how many children have COVID-19, and then I start seeing more news stories. Oh my goodness, there's 3 over here, 4 over in this country, or whatever. And what confirmation bias is, you start to find stories that confirm your thinking. So your thinking was subjective, it was based on only your opinion and your assumption, your belief. But now you're going to confirm it through other negative information that's going to confirm what you're feeling or what you're thinking about the situation. So that can really compound things, because, and honestly, for anxiety sufferers, it's terrible. Confirmation bias is terrible, because we're constantly looking to confirm that this is going to happen. And how you can just work yourself into a frenzy. So it's really, really important that you understand those biases and how they work, so that you can consciously not do them. Now, how does all of this affect your stress and anxiety from a physiological perspective? Well, what happens is we have this fight or flight system inside of us, obviously to protect us, but unfortunately, it's very sensitive. It can be triggered by a thought alone. Right, so if a single thought alone can trigger my fight or flight system, my brain will release adrenaline, my adrenal glands will release cortisol, and we'll have all these chemicals running through our body. And that's okay in a short-term basis, but the problem becomes when we are in this fight or flight state for a prolonged time. And what happens is it knocks us out of homeostasis. So homeostasis, think of your body being balanced, right? All the chemicals are moving. Our bodies are like a chemical factory, right? We have these chemicals going through us all the time. But so let's just think of our bodies when they're in its finest balance, they're at homeostasis. We're just nice and balanced, feeling great. Now we have a stimulus like the news, and we feel just the thought brings on the stress. Boom, adrenaline, cortisol starts coursing through our body. And the problem becomes when this is prolonged and you don't turn off that fight or flight system, so you constantly have this fight or flight system going, adrenaline, cortisol. What tends to happen is you knock your equilibrium out of balance, right? So you're out of homeostasis. And if you're out of homeostasis, that's where anxiety disorders and high stress levels kick in, and you're just in this frenzy that you can't get out of. So it's really important that you understand that just your thought alone is going to trigger fight or flight, and constant fight or flight is going to put you into a very high stress state or an anxiety disorder. If you have an anxiety, it can take you to panic attacks and all sorts of things like that. So understanding that and knowing that it can be really important, because then you can consciously say, and this is kind of leading to the last part of this video, is what can you do to sort of combat all this? Number one thing I learned over the years dealing with anxiety for a long, long time was looking at the news objectively. So again, I take the news and I look at it from an objective standpoint, and I try to say, okay, well, this is happening. Again, another really good way to do it, and I'm gonna kind of, I read this in one of Dale Carnegie's books years ago. I think it was his book. Don't quote me on that. It was called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. He said, anytime there's negative information, try to be a lawyer against that negative information. So try to pretend you're in a court of law and you need to you need to get facts that are going to support your evidence, saying that it's not negative, it's positive, or things are getting better. And I guess what you can do in a negative situation like COVID-19 or this global pandemic is start to look for more positive news. And as you accumulate that positive news, it's going to make you start feeling better, right? Rather than just taking in the shell shock headlines. The other thing you can do is obviously cut back the media. We know nowadays media is everywhere. You can get it 24/7, 365 on your phone, a simple touch of a button. And so some of the things I put in place is my Apple phone. It had that, it's great. It would send me these media updates, and which is fantastic, but it would get me reading the news unconsciously. I don't like to read the news regularly anyways, but when I had these updates, it would just pop up and I'd go, oh, well, check that out. So unconsciously you start looking at the news, and then next thing you know, you're in the news, you're looking at all these different sites, and you're doing it for 20-30 minutes. So I've turned that off on my phone. So if you have something like that, you may want to turn that off. The other thing I've done is I've hidden my social media feeds in my phone, so they're hard to find. So again, I can't unconsciously get into Facebook and start scrolling and reading articles that I don't even know who wrote. But for me, that's really important, because cutting back my time on social media during times like this is important, because you can really work yourself up in a frenzy with all sorts of information out there. Like, so much information, you don't even know what's true, right? So why not go to a reputable source and just kind of stick with that? So I've hidden the social media thing. But the interesting thing with social media and how the brain works, and I found this over time, is you can hide those widgets, but your brain will finally, after some time, actually know, even if it's 3 or 4 steps to get into it, how to do it unconsciously. So you may have to actually hide it every month or 2 months in another spot, so the brain doesn't know where it is, because it's really interesting that after like 6 weeks, my brain remembers where it is, and I have to go hide it again. So that's another thing that you can do. And lastly, you need to be informed. So watching the news is important, but like once a day, and not in the mornings, because in the mornings what you read or think about in the morning is setting you up for the rest of the day. So do you want to read the news and media as soon as you wake up? Nope. You want to look at positive things, practice some gratitude, maybe do some yoga or meditation, and start your day. And I'll be doing videos on that later on, but really start your day on a more positive note, and then you're a little bit more resilient to negative news as well. So I like to watch it around 11 or 12, and then I'll turn it back on at 6 or 7 just to see, is there anything new? If not, I don't get into it. I don't leave it on for long. So again, this video was for people that are a little bit more anxious during times like these, or are suffering with anxiety, and hopefully some of these things will help you. And I'll be doing more videos in regards to other skills and things that can help. I think the next video I'll do will be on how to set up your brain, upgrade your brain, so that we don't have this archaic system or wiring that makes us want to actually look at negative information, and you can actually start to want to look at more positive information. Anyways, hope that helped. Keep smiling. Have a great day.